Good sleep should come naturally, and with a new natural hybrid mattress, it can. A collaboration between Lisa and West Elm, the natural hybrid is expertly crafted from natural latex, natural wool, and certified safe foams to elevate your sleep sanctuary and support a greener tomorrow. Breathable organic cotton and moisture-wicking Joma wool consistently provide cool and comfortable slumber. Every purchase helps fuel Lisa's work with shelters and those in need. Visit lisa.com to learn more. That's LEESA.com. According to the AHA, heart disease is the leading cause of death in the U.S. But what if you could detect it from home? Introducing the Body Scan Smart Scale by Withings. In just 90 seconds, perform a medical-grade ECG and detect the most common cardiac anomaly. Empower your health journey with Body Scan. Visit withings.com. That's WITHINGS.com. And save 10% with code PODCAST. Also available on Amazon and Best Buy. Electrocardiogram is available via Withings Scan Monitor 2.0.
Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin, Bob Marks, and Andy Cohen. This week's show is brought to you by Capital South, LLC, a Washington, D.C. lobby and public relations firm headed by Washington, D.C. top lobbyist Marty Irby. For more information, call or text 202-821-5686.
Once again, that number is
202-821-5686.
Capital South, LLC, Marty Irby.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show is the #1 harness racing podcast in North America. We have sponsorships and advertising spots available. For more information, email rrtrotten@outlook.com or visit ustrots.com. The statements and opinions of our guests are their personal opinions and beliefs, and it does not necessarily represent the opinions of the Harness Racing Alumni Show or of its host.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
Hey, Fred, who's our guest?
Today is standardbred owner and former USTA Director, Dave Siegel. Welcome back to the Harness Racing Alumni Show. Dave, you found out that one or more of your horses had been nerve blocked after they had been dropped in to race. So tell us about that and what was the outcome?
It's a very interesting situation. I was not aware that either the vet on his own or the trainer asked the vet to block a horse's foot. By the way, this is just so you know, this is in 2017. After I was made aware of this, I went back and looked at my own vet records, and I saw that the vet had blocked other horses of mine in a similar way 4 previous times, either on race day or the day before the races. And at least by California racing rules, you're not allowed to do that after a horse has been entered. And generally we enter about 4 or 5 days before the race. And it's pretty clear why that rule exists, at least in California. Obviously, the vets who wrote that rule thought it was not healthy and safe for a horse to have his nerves blocked so he couldn't feel pain. I frankly do not know what the rules are in other jurisdictions. They're very difficult to kind of look up, but out here, that's what the rule was. So after I found this out, I did nose around some, and I found that this was somewhat common practice. But the only hard evidence I had, of course, was my own, the 4 or 5 times that it happened with my own horses. So I didn't think this was right, and I reported it to the CHRB, the California Horse Racing Board, and they did 3 separate investigations. And in the end, only found that the vet was at fault by not filling out the proper paperwork and fined him $100. And I was really put off by this. The goal here was to stop this practice because I didn't think it was right for the horses, and more importantly, obviously, the CHRB didn't either by writing that rule. But it was also very clear to me that something was going on because I had mountains of evidence that this had gone on, the vet's own vet records. And the CHRB said effectively that wasn't a strong enough case and only had this minor $100 fine that they put on that they put on the vet. So as you know, I'm a proponent of HISA, and this is not a HISA discussion, but that's largely from my perspective about protecting the horses who can't speak for themselves. So I had a decision to make whether to pursue it further, and I did decide to do it, even though I knew I was putting kind of my neck on the line out here, because I had a feeling that this is something that the racetrack didn't like, and certainly the vet wouldn't like, and maybe other trainers who wanted to squeeze their horses in when they weren't really supposed to be racing. And I understand all the economic drivers to do that and to have that behavior. So my next course of action was to go to the veterinary review board. And that was probably about 3 years later. So that was about 2020 or so. And the same thing happened. They stalled, and I was told by some insiders that I just happened to know that there was clear pressure on the vet review board from the CHRB to drop this. I'll use the word sweep it under the rug, but to just basically look the other way and ignore it. Why? I'm not sure. But that was pretty clear, and their behavior reflected that. So now fast forward another 3 years, and I am now pretty much at my wit's end on this. And I thought about what else could I do. And the last and only other option was the press. And I thought this had no shot. So I wrote to 3 or 4 newspapers, and shockingly, the San Francisco Chronicle was interested in the story. And even more shockingly, they wrote it up and they put it on the front page of a Sunday newspaper. They came out, they interviewed me twice, they took pictures of, I own a couple retired horses, they took pictures of those horses, and they got the whole story. And either by pure coincidence or not, the vet review board got interested, and they took their next step, which is to, through the Attorney General's office here, actually file a complaint, which is a formal adjudication through the administrative law judge section of the code out here. Well, that long story short, the vet settled after several months, and that settlement was made public, which I got to look at about a month ago. And they fined the vet. Don't hold me to these numbers, but I think it was about $14,000. They required that he repay all the expenses of the Attorney General's office, which is about $10,000, in bringing the litigation forward at that time. So in the end, he was about $25,000 out of pocket. They made him attend some kind of vet ethics course, some other continuing education. They suspended his license for 3 years, but immediately stayed that decision. And basically, we'll call it under some form of probation, and this will all go away if there's not another complaint where he's found liable, in the next several years. So finally, 7 years later, the matter is done, and I don't know if I've achieved my objective, because there was only one objective, and that was to stop that practice, at least at Cal Expo, which is the harness track in Northern California, and the only one. And pretty much he's the only vet that covers the racetrack. So it's not like I have to get to a whole bunch of vets. So will the practice stop? I don't know. I'm sure hoping it will, and I was happy that it went this way. I did not want to put this vet out of business. I think he's basically a good guy, and he was probably just doing what the trainers asked. But to me, it's up to the vet to say no. Whether they have that customer relationship with the trainer or not, if it has to be put at risk, then it has to be put at risk. Just like if somebody asked a vet to give the horse an illegal drug, he's supposed to say no. Or, a drug inside the acceptable windows, they're supposed to say no. So hopefully that's what's going to happen at least here. Anyway, I know that was a very long-winded answer. Believe it or not, that was a shortened version of it because it went on for 7 years that I was persistent about. And Now I'm probably persona non grata there, but I think I still did the right thing, and I can sleep just fine at night.
Dave, did you ever find out what they were using to block the horses off with?
No, I don't know what the actual. It probably is in my vet records. I would be very certain that it is not an illegal drug that they use to, the anesthetic that's used there, and the procedure is not against the rules in certain time windows. But it certainly is in California, as I said earlier. It's after the horse has entered to race, which basically means 4 or 5 days before. And like I also said, I don't know what the rule is in other jurisdictions. I would think it would be similar, and it'd be interesting. I should do the research to see what the HISA rules are for thoroughbred racing. Obviously, they don't have rules yet for harness racing. I would sure hope it's there if and when the first harness jurisdiction decides to be covered under HISA, which I would hopefully expect, given the recent ruling last week, that should happen pretty soon.
After we spoke last week, I went out and I did some research, and I found that the nerve blocking is a common practice that is still going on. The nerve blocking of horses after being entered to race, I couldn't figure out how they could do this without being caught, showing positive on the testing. But I did find out that they used to block off horses with alcohol blocks. It seems that now they're using some type of concoction that they use is with a combination of alcohol, cobra venom, and battery acid. In Europe, nerve blocking is banned, and a good trotter went over there, and after earning close to like $3 million, they found out that he was nerved, and the owners had to return his winnings. Bob, do you remember what horse that was?
Not offhand. No, I don't remember offhand.
Oh, that doesn't sound very good. But again, I have to plead ignorance on this one. And I would imagine there are good uses and good times you're supposed to do nerve blocks. I know in nerving overall, which is a permanent cutting of nerves, right, I believe some jurisdictions don't allow it at all, period. And I think in other jurisdictions there has to be something in the records, I think. So somebody claiming a horse, for example, would know ahead of time that this horse has been nerved.
Dave, the next subject I want to discuss with you, you were a USTA Director, and you lost the most recent election due to the fact that I think that because you were a HISA supporter. What's your drift on that?
I was very surprised when a gentleman from Delaware threw his hat in the ring, and that I had never heard of. And to the best of my knowledge, he was an unknown in California, and I was part of District 3, which is pretty much the western states, and the only racetrack that races in that area is Cal Expo. So I was very, very surprised. So I certainly smelled a rat there because it just seems so odd. And yes, I was an outspoken proponent of HISA, but I was more outspoken about the way the USTA was, I thought, mismanaging its money with respect to backing HISA. So there were two really separate things there, particularly since Russell Williams said that if the USTA didn't pony up, if I remember right, 2 different $500,000 payments, that Hanover Shoe Farms would do it themselves. So why, when a third party was willing to save the USTA membership at least $1 million, why the USTA would continue to pay was, I thought, breaking their fiduciary responsibility to the members. So for those two reasons, I was one of the very few directors at the time, maybe 4 or 5, that were in favor of HISA, and clearly the most outspoken one. So it was somewhat coincidental that this person threw his hat in the ring. There were no rules that were being broken. It is odd that our own rules allow somebody in any jurisdiction, or frankly anywhere, it's not even limited to a country or frankly even the planet, that somebody could run in California, somebody who lived in South Africa, could run for a district seat in California. So that was all very surprising. So I certainly thought it was possible that this person was pushed to run or asked to run due to my feelings about HISA, but that's unproven. And given the other thing that I just described to you, the incident with the vet out here, that was also another theory. And I'm sure it's one of those two things that caused this person to run and likely have somebody ask. And I'll never know. If you ask me as someone who is involved in a wagering industry, I think it's the latter. Okay, I think while there was that sentiment against me at the USTA because I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid that Russell and Joe was asking everybody else to drink with respect to HISA, I really think, and I'm way out on a limb here because this is all conjecture, that it was local and that the racetrack in particular was unhappy that I was potentially causing this vet a headache and potentially causing fewer horses to be able to race if this was a widespread practice. And that's where I think, if I had to guess, the influence came from. And that probably somebody in racetrack management asked this person to come out and run. And much like on the director's level at the USTA, there's great influence by Russell and Joe with respect to shaping the opinions of other board members. I think it's the same way out here with track management. I think they have a pretty strong following in terms of loyalty by the horsemen out here. So if somebody involved with track management said Dave's no good and you ought to vote for this other fellow, I think that would carry an awful lot of weight. And if I remember right, I think I lost something like 60-40 or 65-35. It was pretty strong feeling. And these are the only two things that I could think of, HISA and the vet thing, but the vet thing was local. I think that's probably what did the trick. I'll never know unless somebody from the inside speaks up, which you know this industry, they won't.
Recently, USTA Director Mark Ford met with Lisa Nazaris, the CEO of HISA, and after the meeting, he had a change of opinion of HISA. Any thoughts on that, Dave?
I read about that. I know Mark, not real well, but he was a fellow director with me for whatever the 9 years or so I served on the board. And he's a pretty highly opinionated individual. So I think it was great that he was open-minded enough to take the meeting. In fact, after I read this, I wrote him an email and told him how I thought it was terrific that he was at least open-minded enough to go into that room. And then to come out and admit that his opinion had changed, it really takes a big person to do that. And I commend him on both counts for doing so. And yeah, it's what, of course, I have been saying as somebody who's been on the inside for all that time and attended every executive committee meeting on this topic, even though I wasn't on the executive committee. We were able to attend and spoke up at every one of those meetings and encouraged the leadership and Mike Tanner in particular to have a spot where they would at least publish the other opinions about it, because they control the media. I mean, obviously they don't control all of the media. All they do is control their own site. But in this industry, you probably know that I'm going to guess 90% of the information that horsemen get is from the USTA site. So they have a very strong platform to shape opinion. And they were clearly withholding an awful lot about HISA on the positive side, not so much on the negative side. Anytime something went bad with HISA, of course, that published there. And of course, they don't publish other statistics that might have been favorable to HISA or unfavorable to the status quo. Their alternative legislation, that was an absolute joke. It still is. It had, I don't want to say no support, but virtually no support in Congress. And we know the Jockey Club spent, and other supporters like Doral, but it wasn't limited to those two, literally spent millions of dollars over many, many, many years to get this legislation through. And if the USTA thought for a second that they could spend a little bit of money to not only undo HISA, but that Congress would have the appetite for an alternative set of legislation, I've got a great bridge to sell you in the middle of the desert. A total joke, and they were hoodwinking the membership. Now, why? I don't know. I guess deep down, Russell and Joe genuinely feel that HISA is a bad thing. My position has always been, it sure looks like it's going to be the law. Work with them, and they will come back and tell you that at the time, before it was passed, the Jockey Club was not willing to listen. That was total. I'll call it what it is: bullshit, absolute untruth. And I had direct information about the willingness of the Jockey Club to listen, and just what they reported just wasn't the complete truth. And because of that, they shaped the memberships. And now they're still talking about some level of fight. At least that was the last article that was put on the USTA site. Hopefully, Mark's coming around might lead to some other directors listening to the other side, and if given the opportunity. But it's all moot now anyway, because once the law is going to be the law, the remaining circuit, I would imagine, will come around and deem things constitutional, and then we'll just see who's the first jurisdiction to opt in, assuming that happens. And I think they've played it wrong, because I would have thought it was a smarter play to try to be working as best they could inside with HISA to be ready for the day to have things on the most favorable terms. And let's hope that HISA is open-minded and will put the past behind them, even though I would understand if they weren't, because the USTA caused them, and the other anti-HISA groups involved in the legal battle, caused HISA a boatload of money in terms of defending themselves. But of course, I smile. You can't see me. We're not on video. I'm smiling when I say, well, guess who's going to pay for that? Not HISA. Not HISA. The harness horsemen. They're going to pay for it because it's a nonprofit, and their fees are going to be higher now than they otherwise would have been if HISA didn't have to spend the millions and millions that they had to spend to defend this. But hopefully, HISA is a good group and a professional group, and they'll put all that behind them, and they'll treat the harness group fairly, which is what I think is exactly what's going to happen. And lucky for harness racing that there's that way, because many others in that position wouldn't be so favorable to a group that caused them such angst.
Yes, Jim Gagliano, the CEO of the Jockey Club, tried to set up a meeting with Russ at Hanover Shoe Farms, and Russ told him, don't bother coming. My last question. Mark also said that the USDA has 60 directors, but really only 2. Do you agree with that?
In essence, yes. From a legal perspective, that's not correct. Me and others as directors, we all have equal votes, and we vote, and a group of directors can certainly vote the way they want, and the majority wins. But the reality is, I do not remember in my years on the board a case where Joe and Russell felt strongly one direction, and the balance of the directors went the other direction. It wasn't that way. And even if you attended the meetings, and by the way, the annual meeting is open to the public, so anybody can go, and you'd observe it firsthand. It's probably worthwhile to go into Columbus the next time they meet in March and listening, and then you'll see it firsthand. But let's just say, do they have incredible influence? Yes. They do. And like I said, I don't remember an instance where Russell or Joe felt one way and the balance of the directors went against them. And frankly, I'm a good example. Even while I was a director, there was a time I was on the executive board, and then I wasn't. They will point to other reasons for it, but I certainly felt it was related to my stance on HISA in particular. I agree with Mark in practice. They really called the shots, and it's through the great influence they have. And I would say that the role as lemmings, that's a strong word, and I'll take heat for that word. Not all the directors, but many, many, many of the directors. And I'll tell you, I know I'm rambling here, but we had a spokesperson that Mike Tanner brought in, 7-8 years ago, talking about the size of the board. And her message was really clear and she wrote a book about board sizing, that our board is way too large at 60 people. And I was still am in favor of a significant reduction. I mean, the board should almost be the executive committee in size at the largest, which is 15. But it'll never happen. The reason why it will never happen is because the directors won't vote themselves out in terms of structure. That's why it'll never happen. They might even agree that I don't think they would, but it would be best for the board to be smaller, as long as they didn't have to give up their seat. Well, that can't happen then, obviously, if there's 60 members. And then maybe if there was a smaller amount, the board would be stronger and more influential across the board, but not the way it's set up now. Yeah, but I'll tell you, I have 2 retired horses that I keep, and I have 2 horses racing in Indiana, and it's really hard for me to stay with it because I can't make much of a difference. Maybe in this one spot in California with the blocking practice I have. But I joined the USTA to make a difference, and I didn't. I mean, in the end, I failed. That's the bottom line. Not for being tossed out or voted out, but I couldn't sway enough members to see the light in a bunch of areas. Besides HISA, tattooing was another. There's a handful of areas related to horse safety, and I couldn't persuade them, so I failed in my effort there. I'm close to throwing up my hands. I'll try not to go away though, not for a bit. Thanks for having me, by the way. Appreciate it.
Dave, you did not fail. You have made a difference for the betterment of harness racing. Now, over to Andy for his weekly update.
Thanks, Fred. I actually don't have an update this week because I'm not going to write a column for next Monday at Pollock Report, my Keeping Pace column. This past week focused on some interesting stuff relating to HISA and to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has issued a series of rulings that are designed to sort of undermine federal agencies like the FTC, which governs HISA and the new federal regulations. So it'll be interesting to watch that. I hope everyone has a great holiday week, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show is the #1 harness racing podcast in North America and is listened to worldwide on multiple platforms, including Spreaker, iHeartRadio, USTrots.com, HarnessLink, Google Podcasts, and many others. To our audience, thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show